Welcome in, everyone. This has been a long time coming, and plenty of work has gone into this, as you can see from the screen. But big thanks to Scoop and Phil, who've come in and worked together a little bit on this beautiful coloring that we've seen here, and just the formulas and stuff that you'll explain for us, mate. But we're going to be pushing hard to target these first 6 rounds, and that's what we're here for. We've done a lot of the player analysis, and now we're going to look at the draw and see if we can find some nice runs for certain decisions because there's going to be 50-50 calls that you make between players in the mid-range, the cheapies, the guns. Should help you in deciding which play you are going to go for. So Scoop, take it away. This is your lovely spreadsheet, and I appreciate your work on this one.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Believe it or not, this spreadsheet was pretty much actually the first thing I got into in this season because when you're so far out in December, in January, you've still got not too much of an idea. And we got the draw a lot earlier this year, and the fantasy opened a lot later. But yeah, Phil is an absolute legend. Shout him some love in the Discord. He made this great engine up where if you modify the order of the ladder, it'll change the colors for you depending on where they are in the draw. And you can see from the coloration, you can find a few little spots that are nice and open up for some of these teams. So you can go by color, but I've expanded that a little bit, and we'll get into that later. But for now, we're mostly just looking at these first 6 rounds because I mean that's what we want to target to begin the year.
Definitely, mate. So yeah, if we're going to focus in on those, let's blow it up a little bit for the people viewing at home. And mate, it's nice and simple when you go across the line there with the Titans, the Storm, the Dragons, the Knights. It goes along that line there, which is what you saw, guys, in the preseason when I threw that up, but it didn't have all the teams in there. It just had when they had a bye, and I analyzed it that way. And that's all well and good, right?
Yeah.
Is going grabbing players for runs without buys or looking at the buy period and going, oh, these guys have a nice little slot, but it doesn't focus on those teams, which you were saying last year you had it all set up, ladder wise, and then it all blew up in your face in the first few rounds. So at least now you can change this as you go and see how it goes, obviously. And if teams are hitting form, you could move them into a different color range and stuff like that manually, which is really, really cool. So yeah, an awesome thing, mate. And let's kick it off with the Titans, obviously with the bye. How do you see their first five games for them in that first six?
I think their first 5 games look pretty juicy, to be honest. I mean, as you said, things can change at the drop of a hat, and that is one of the good things about this time. You can just adjust and see how that goes. But yeah, from the look of it, when you've got teams like Newcastle not having great halves, Roosters that their team's very blown up, Dolphins without Wayne, Dragons are the Dragons. They looked pretty decent in the trial, but I still don't know if I'd have them pushing for eighth place or higher. So you do have a nice little run to begin the year, and I think there can be some guys like Brimson, like Jaden Campbell, that might be able to put on some points, and really does make you think about should I buy a Looper Titan for round one if, say, I don't know, one of your wing fullbacks goes well in your like 18th place.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what we'll be looking at with our Titans. And as you said there, no red at all the way until post first major bye with Melbourne and Brisbane there. But for those playing along on podcasts, his ladder he's got right now is Melbourne into Penrith, Cronulla third. We got Broncos in fourth. That's a pretty tough little bracket here, but he snuck Canberra in at eighth. So good on you, Canberra. South at seventh, Dogs at sixth, Manly at fifth. And then just missing out, he's got Roosters at ninth, Tigers into 10th, Para, his team into 11th. And shout out to Phil, who in his ladder had Scoop's team last in 17th. So tough times, mate. And then my Cowboys in 12th and situated into four different colours now. So we've got, if my eyes don't deceive me, is that green or yellow? I'm a bit colorblind, but we've got red into the orange, the grey, the yellow, and then into the green there. And the green is the goods. These are the teams that do leak a few points, and they're obviously helpful for your fantasy players, is what we're looking at here. So Storm, mate, they're probably a little bit more relevant to kick off the year. A lot of people don't like starting with buy players, but talk us through, especially that first 3 rounds. I'm looking at that and finding that a bit tough.
Yeah, it is a tough looking one. I think though Para, even though they seem to really rock up against teams like Penrith and Storm for some reason, they're still not going to be amazing defensively, and there could be a few points on offer. So I'm not worried about that. I think Harry Grant, especially, has really, really good stats against the Eels if you're wanting to go that route in addition to Watson or something. But yeah, buy and then Penrith Panthers isn't the most fun thing to look at for a Storm owner. So
Mm.
I don't think they're a fantastic one to load up on based on that. But after that initial opening salvo, you've got a very strong Storm team with a run of teams like St. George, Manly, Warriors, Dolphins, Rabbitohs. That's looking pretty juicy, and that could be a real time for Munster, for Hughes, for Grant, all those big guns to open up and really put up some big scores. So maybe if you're not keen on taking many, you can have a look at them in round four when one of your guys in sort of that mid-range bracket has either got injured or fallen over a bit. They might be a good team to swap to around that round four.
Definitely, mate. I've seen it's an interesting topic because there's a bit of discussion around, I'm looking at Howarth being a guy that I wanted in my side, but once the draw came out, I was like, oh, I don't really like that as much, and maybe I'll look to target him in round 4 or 5, or you could do that with Munster as well. You could do that with guys like Harry Grant, and people are like, well, if you're wanting them, why don't you just grab them from the start? Like, you wait using that extra trade in round 4, 5, 6, but the other side to look at that is you are going to make trades in those weeks, and there are going to be injuries and the like there. And it's more one of those things like if you don't end up with them, that's fine, but it could work out well that you do wait, and then it's like, oh, they're a little bit cheaper or they're the same price, and it's like, oh, I'm ready to jump on them now. How do you see it with the buys in general and having like an awkward start? Do you look ahead at potential trades or guys you might be looking to target if they happen to lose a bit of cash? Do you look ahead to that stuff?
I look ahead a bit, but you can only play what's in front of you. So I especially remember in the last few years with the really complicated looking buys, they've been hard to navigate and plan accurately. I think I've planned like half of the origin period before in round 12, and I made about half of the same actual trades that I wanted. So you've got to look at
Okay.
what's in front of you and what is actually the most appealing. But I do think there are times where you will look to pick up a fallen gun, especially after a hard start, especially in those kind of wing fullback positions. So you see for the Storm, not so much, but maybe if you look for a bit with a little bit of red, that looks really juicy to pick up a cheap drink water, doesn't it?
Mm.
After the buy. That could mean we have like 550k drinky or something, and we just do what we did last year and get him cheap and stick him in our wing fullback for the rest of the year, and then maybe move him to sort of that 18th man in our final team.
Yeah, just straight up looking at the worst draw, it has to be the Cowboys, right? To
To
start.
start the year,
Yeah.
it's got to be close. Hey, look at that, all
Mm.
red and orange.
Yeah. And even South, like Canberra's not easy to score on. Manly's not, they're going to be a good team. And then South, they could be humming by round 6 with, if Aiken's back, Murray's there, Latrell's kicking, Walker's, coming back from to get them to full health as well. So that could be pretty tough for them. And you look at a couple other teams, you've got Rabbitohs with, a nice first 2 games and then Cronulla and Penrith. But yeah, let's keep going down the line, mate. Dragons probably not super relevant, but they go that buy in round 3 into Melbourne in round 4 before it does seem to open up a bit as well. So we can probably just learn more on the Dragons teams, can't we? And make our decisions from there on that one. What do you think of Mr. Toby Couchman the other night?
Oh, I can't wait for his 1 ppm to come into the NRL starting. I was on him a while ago, but it's just a matter of will he get the minutes with Little surely demanding some decent lock minutes, and you've got Gula coming over as well. I can easily see him hitting mid 40s in sort of 45ish minutes, but does he push up to that 50? I'm not sure. So I am very tempted in taking him now, but when you've got so many of those value guys, I don't know if you really can pick a guy like that unless you're desperate.
Yeah. And mate, scroll down for us. You got the opponent predicted average ladder position there, and I think that'll be pretty cool to just have a little focus on with all those teams. And when those numbers spit out, you can really see that, mate. What have you got there just based on those numbers as the nicest teams to go off?
So I've split this up into the next 4 games, the next 8 games. Their average ladder opponents. So higher is better, obviously, lower ladder number.
Hmm.
And you've got the hardest stretch and the easiest stretch that you might look to target. But to start the year, this is what we're looking at. So Titans, as
Beautiful.
you can see, yeah, it looks pretty green. Knights are also pretty nice. So we just finished the Dragons. We go up and look at Knights. Yeah, they've got like a Cronulla in there and like a couple of not so good games, but there's quite a lot of green in amongst that first 10 or 11 rounds. And overall, they look pretty nice. And I mean, West's Tigers, for example, even though I predict them to do probably, I don't know, like 10th or so this year, that round one team where they've got so many new players trying to form combinations, that might be a little better than it looks as well. So I do like guys like Lucas and Marju and Ponga potentially being able to do pretty well in that early start
Hmm.
compared to some of those other more expensive guys who might drop a little bit of cash in other teams.
Yeah, well, I saw down there you had Cowboys at 5 was the average ladder position in the first 4 games, so that's
Yeah.
pretty tough. And then your Eels as well, mate, at 5.5, and they potentially have a few interesting players that we might want to look at. Obviously, with their edge back row, it's feeling a little bit like 2023, mate, with the Cardi and Dury, double fantasy relevant back rowers at the moment. Hey,
It could be. Hey, well, I just keep thinking that surely Cartwright can't be dropped or anything, but I mean, it's new coach and it's really starting to look like it could be that combination.
yeah,
So if they do get whacked a bit early on, maybe they shake it up, and that could really suck, especially for if you pick the Dury instead of the Carty.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, but I do think that there is room for some value there. Just beware that maybe you won't see a 50 from Tuilagi early on, for example.
Yeah, it just depends if can he get those easy tries like that whole run he did the other night was really nice. But yeah, moving on to the Wars, mate, they have an interesting schedule. Around 5 bye. It doesn't make, too much of a difference for us. And the first 4 games doesn't look too bad, but it's a question of can you lock in outside backs for this type of team, or do you look towards some of the forwards and it probably doesn't matter too much what the draw looks like?
Yeah, it's not too bad early, and then you've got really bad and then pretty decent. So overall, I don't think it's going to affect them too much. It just depends on how good they're going to be. And I do have them in line for the spoon at the moment, unfortunately. But
Mm.
last time I said that they made top four, so it's all good. It's all good,
Yes,
don't
that's
worry.
right.
Um, I think their forwards are going to just churn out the work, no matter who they play. Maybe against Melbourne and Brisbane they get battered a bit,
Mm.
but I think guys like Fisher Harris, even like your Clark and Barnett types, will just have a pretty consistent time. Maybe they'll do a little bit better against the teams that are fresher or a bit changed, like Wests and like the Roosters. But overall, I think it's pretty bog standard.
Yeah, it feels like they'll probably be well in those first 4 games, unless the Roosters and Manly come out super hot in attack. But it looks like a game for Metcalf to be pretty solid in that first 4 rounds anyway. So I don't think you go into it too worried. It's not like they could get shut out and he gets no goals and no assists and stuff like that. I think they'll be fairly free flowing in a few of those matchups anyway, who are fairly attacking based, and we've seen that the Tigers aren't great defensively as yet. So yeah, they'll be an interesting side for sure. But mate, plenty of potential options in the Dogs. How do you see their draw?
Yeah, it's a pretty strong to start the year. Then they have a bye, and it's not too bad after that as well. So I wouldn't talk you out of going somebody like a Matt Burton, except for the fact there's just so many other options this year. Any
Mm.
other year, your Fogartys and your Burtons don't look too bad with their draws. Um, a little bit of an awkward buy, but I mean, whenever you have a buy, it's going to be a bit annoying. It's not too bad having it at that time if somebody hasn't worked out or you've made a bit of money on them and want to jump off.
Mm. Yeah, that's right. Because cashies can do a decent job, and if you do end up starting with the Tom Amone, then it could end up okay, mate. But before we go any further, did anything kind of stand out to you in the trials? We haven't spoken to you since we saw those.
Oh, I haven't been able to catch as much as I'd like, but yeah,
Any of the stats or
after
anything?
hyping up Tom Malone so much, it just looks like he's going to have to work up to the pace of the NRL, and we probably won't see him from Bulldogs' point of view. But yeah, as you said, Couchman is looking good, looking big, um, and are we going to see? Surely not. Corey Pay suddenly turn into a different player with shockingly good PPM. Surely not.
Yeah, well, the first one, like the the hole that he saw when he was about to pick up the ball at dummy half was super wide, unfortunately. And well, the big problem there with the Titans is that was like a couple of good defenders too. That was like Beaufort Moore was one of them, and then the second one was a nice little offload from the guy he passed it to short to the line. So yeah, you're looking at that, and I think it will get a few people in, especially if he's the starter and it's like Smoothie on the bench. But he did come into that with the 22 jersey on, with Tyson Smoothie being the starter. So who knows, hey? But yeah, there's a few interesting little tidbits across the way, and hopefully all you guys have checked out my two analysis videos on that. But mate, moving to the Cowboys, there we kind of spoke about their first six. It's a bit of a worry for someone
Yeah.
like Drinkwater if you're looking at him. But someone like Bateman, mate, how do you see that type of draw? Do we see him as a guy that could potentially lose some minutes if they are getting beat up a bit?
Yes, I do think potentially, but he's played in the middle before as well, and I think if they're just getting battered, he might be required to help out a bit. So I think his base will be good. Just maybe he won't do anything else and he'll get 48, 49, all that type of score without being fantastic. I currently don't have Bateman, but I've had him a fair bit this preseason. And yeah, it does scare me, especially against like some of the real good teams like Penrith and like Cronulla with the addition of Fanua Blake. They could be really damaging to come up against and try and not get too many negatives. But I think unless you're coming up against those top teams, you're probably going to be all right. But yeah, Cronulla, Brisbane, and Penrith in that first 6 weeks are the type that maybe could get you a 35 or 38 one week.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a worry on Drinkwater. I know a lot of people were super high, and I don't think they looked at the draw yet. But Eels, mate, come up against Melbourne first up, and that's their first and only bit of red until round 9. How do you see them going in general to kick off the year? Do you think they'll start hot? Are they that type of team?
I think they'll. I think they'll surprise a few teams early on with just how many changes they've made, but either the wheels will fall off temporarily then, or about 5 or 6 weeks into the season once teams go, oh, they play like this, because we've known what to expect from the Eels for the last 4 or 5 years, and that's that you have got no idea, and that's worked for them quite a lot of the time. And now it might be a bit more structured, so it'll be different. And I just really don't know because I mean, you've got a Storm assistant coach coming in from a brilliant system that came into a team that basically was one of the most free-flowing attacks when they were on, and that would offload and shovel. So second phase play. I don't know how his style will work, especially as a rookie coach. I'm keen to see it.
Yeah, definitely. And mate, Eagles you mentioned they had a really nice first three games, especially their Cowboys, Warriors, Canberra. But then we do see some red in there as well, come round 5 and 6 with Melbourne and Cronulla after Para there. Are they a team that you could target some of their attacking players early? But again, if you're
It's
attacking early, you're holding on probably for the year as well, aren't you? And was that a yes, was it?
you're probably you're probably starting with them rather than trying to buy them in round five. My hot tip for the early season is that Turbo is going to go on a tear in this first month, maybe average 60, and then everybody's going to buy him in round five for four potential top teams out of five and a buy and get really hurt by that. So there's a hot tip now. don't buy them in round 5 when they've got Melbourne, Cronulla, Dragons, Penrith by Cronulla. That's disgusting. Buy him from round 1 or not at all.
Yeah, and at least then you can hold, and if he doesn't score as well, if he gets injured or whatever, then you haven't used that trade. But looking at that first four, mate, he looks like a really awesome buy in Supercoach to start with, and then could easily pivot from that number there in around 5 or something like that
Mm,
to one of the other top tier guys that there are in this league.
yeah. Maybe he's the trade to Iongi in round 4 or 5.
Yeah, well, I currently have Iongi still, so we'll see how that one goes. But, mate, Roosters, you've got them dropping down to ninth on your list so far, and they do come up against Brisbane and Penrith to kick things off. We are looking at outside backs, to be fair. Not Teddy likely to start, but Rob Toya, Nwangani Tawaze, potentially Billy Smith, Sandon Smith in the halves as well. And then, there's a few guys like Nafahu White, Siwa Wong, Butcher. There's a lot of interesting players from the Roosters. Does this start scare you off any of those outside backs or Sandon Smith? And I saw some slander about Sandon last night after he only scored at the 4 with the try assist. So talk us through it.
Yeah, look, I think you've got to be a little bit worried about the individual scores in those rounds, but there's so much value there just based on their role that you can't really ignore them, or at least you can't ignore all of them.
Hmm.
So I think it might be a good idea to try and maybe loop a Sandon or a Nwanganita Wasay in that round 1 or 2 if you can, if they get blown out. But outside of that, they're in there for a reason. Mark is a huge offloader, big scorer. Yeah, he's going to have rotten games every now and then, like in the trials when he had not his usual defensive cohort and made 2 and missed 4. But then he's also going to have games where from that 350K price, he scores a try, gets 7 tackle breaks and 3 offloads and scores 50.
Nice.
So I'm not too upset about taking Roosters. Just maybe be careful about putting them in your 17 for those first 2 rounds, if you can afford to.
Okay. I like that. It's good advice, mate. And Panthers up next. They do have a couple of red as well with Cronulla into Roosters into Melbourne in their first three. Does that worry you at all for guys like Cleary, or if you take looking at taking a Papali'i, or obviously Yo probably doesn't matter too much, but those sort of more attacking players? If we happen to get like a Jesse McLean and stuff like that, are we worried about that?
Probably not. Like, even though the Storm, I expect the Storm to be better than them this year just with their additions. Like, Panthers are arguably even less um, affected by draw than
Mm.
the Storm. Like you just know what you're going to get. Even though they're playing Cronulla and Penrith in those first 3 rounds, I still expect that they'll be able to do some stuff just with how good they are. So yeah, maybe your Jesse McLean will score 21 rather than 31, but that's still not a 6 compared to like maybe if a Jackson Purdue were to start and then got absolutely belted by Brisbane or Penrith in round 3 or 5.
Yeah, well, that's why we've got obviously guys like Tom Duffy as well in that bracket, but just so cheap, hey, if you're starting half it, even
Mm.
against those tough teams, it'd be hard not to take for sure. But also, guys, just be aware that the lead up to the big buys, so that sort of 9, 10, 11 into the big buys, I'll do a big buy planning video as well. So we're really just focusing on this on the beginning draw, which is what you guys need at this point right now, especially with you know not being a big issue this year with those minor buys only needing 13. But mate, the Tigers to kick things off, it's pretty nice for them, I think, given they've got
What a
so much
game.
turnover and so many new players to probably come up against some free flowing attacks as well. So I think that'll be fun games to watch, those Tigers games early.
I think that's the type of style that you want if you're a club in semi upheaval. You want
Three
games where
spoons.
you're not under the pump and aren't able to play what you're wanting to try and play. If you can set up how your combinations work with some of these easier games, like potentially Dolphins, Warriors, Newcastle, Para as well, in that first 4 rounds, that's really nice. I think out of all of the teams, yeah, Tigers have the best average ladder position of opponent in my ladder in that first 4 weeks. So
Wow.
maybe Jerome Luai gets off to an absolute flyer and if you missed him, he's already up 80K.
Mm,
Do you take him?
yeah.
It's a serious question.
And guys like Skelton and those types of attacking players, hey?
Mm.
Big Alex
Well,
Seyfarth.
Skelton. Oh, so it'd be good if he goes back to that. What was it, 2022 one where he averaged 52 because he scored a couple of tries rather than 47 because he scored only base. But yeah,
Yeah.
we'll see how that turns out. But yeah, I mean, last time we had a super duper scoring winger at the Tigers, he was named David Nofaluma, and he carved the mid 20 and late 2010s like Brian Todd does now for the Panthers. So maybe we'll see the resurgence of a new gun Tigers wing fullback in the wing. So it's possible, but yeah.
Definitely made. And the Bunnies, they've got, two in the green to kick things off, and then it goes into two red. So a pretty interesting start for them in that first four. How do you see that draw, and do you think that affects anyone in that squad?
I think it's a little unfortunate that they're coming in a little bit busted to round one and two because they might not be able to make as much use of those opening two games as they would like. And then they've got all their guys like Totola, Johnson, Aitken all returning probably around those difficult games. And that will help with those difficult games, but they still might end up going after the first month, 1 and 3 or something like that.
Mm.
So I think they really need to try and make the most of those two with the outs that they'll potentially have for round one. Because yeah, it might get ugly if they don't.
Yeah, for sure. Broncos up next, mates. Sydney, Roosters into Canberra, into the Cowboys, into the Dolphins, Tigers. So looking pretty solid on that list you've got there for the Broncos, mate. Do we see you obviously see a resurgence for them, popping them in fourth in your ladder?
Yeah, I think they're going to shoot up a lot. I found it really hard to juggle where the Bulldogs and where the Broncos would go. I could easily swap Bulldogs to fourth and Broncos to sixth, but this is what I've got. And yeah, first 6 rounds, good. First 7 rounds, even. I've only got one team that I have in my finishing top eight, and that's Canberra in eighth. So that's a really nice opening game. Out of this, the Broncos have quite a quite a good start.
Hmm. Really gonna be a fun team, especially if they can get things going. And there's definitely a good option out there if you wanted to take like a Reece Walsh. There's obviously Payne Haas in there. Even guys like Dean Mariner, those play Jesse Arthurs, who people just seem to love. He continues to average 26 every year. But guys like Mariner, yeah, they performed really poorly last year. And those kind of guys could get off to a flyer as much as they aren't super fantasy relevant. They're, Cobbo, I've seen in a few drafts as well of people. So with that start, I think they're all, fine punts like people are doing with guys like Bradman Best, with their start as well. So there are different ways you can start this, and people play fantasy in a different way. And I think with Broncos, it's not a bad team to have a crack at if you think that they can come out and start pretty well and not be that sort of bottom eight team. But Dolphins, mate, they've started the last 2 years, or their 2 years in existence, in incredible fashion. They were in the top four last year for a long time before, injuries and injuries as they always end up happening. Are they a team that you could jump onto a few of those attacking players and just see how it goes to start with?
If the team lists look right, you could. I would hesitate to jump on too many because even though you have Gilbert back, they have been in the comp 2 years now, so maybe they aren't as surprising early season. I remember like everybody was absolutely gobsmacked. They beat the Roosters in their first game ever,
Yeah.
and then they just followed it up from there. So I think they'll do not as well as people expect this year. There's a bit of debate over this because there's a fair few people saying, "Oh no, Dolphins are in it for like top 10 minimum," and there's others saying, "Nah, spoon." I don't
Yeah.
think they're spoon, but I do think that they could struggle without Wayne, the super coach,
Mm.
and a couple of tough games early on. So not necessarily the toughest opening couple, but yeah, round four Broncos, round six Panthers, round seven Melbourne. They could get found out a bit in those games.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's not too bad overall. And they're very, buyers are situated well into the middle of the year. 13 all the way through to 21. There's three of them, so pretty full on there. And then make the Sharks, we see two red in the first 12 games for them. And seems like a solid draw, not as easy as we've had in previous years, probably, for the Sharks to begin.
Yeah, the Sharks have usually been the easiest in the last couple of years, but they've flipped a bit and a middle of the road now, a little bit hard. So
Mm,
even though there's not a lot of red here, I still think that it might not be the easiest for them. They've only got Newcastle, who I've got in that bottom five, and a lot of middle of the table
mm.
teams. I think we're going to really see what they're made of this year because with the addition of Fanua Blake, you would hope that they'd improve on what they were able to do last year and through those middling teams really not lose to many. So if they can stick it to Panthers, maybe even win that, if they come into their round 11 match after their first 10 games and they've won 7 or 8 of them, I think they'll be relatively happy.
Definitely. And the Raiders to finish, mate. They've got two red in their first five. The Wars in the first one in Vegas, and the Manly and Cowboys in between. That doesn't look too easy either, does it?
No, it's a tough start, but they do have the easy draw this year. They have the Sharks draw. From then on, there is a
It's
really
a lot of green.
ridiculous amount of green. So if you do see somebody like a Jamal Fogarty drop because they got bashed a few times,
Hardy
or
Young, those
Tamale
kind of
doesn't do
guys.
so well, maybe you just pick him up in rounds 8 or so, and they'll sail up and soar away then.
Mm. Yeah, these are all really good things to look at because there are fallen guns along the way, and we saw that with guys like Britt Nickera last year. So yeah, Hudson Young, I just mentioned, could be an interesting one in those situations. And
That's a
there's
really
different
good shout,
runs
Hudson Young.
throughout the year that really stand out. And if you can get, find that guy that has fallen a bit and we know what he can produce, then they're great times to jump on these players. So big thanks to you, mate, Scoop, for coming on and going through that beginning draw. And I do hope that it makes it a little bit clearer for everyone with their sort of final decisions on mid-range and guns, especially. And then we'll get into the middle part of the draw. I will at least anyway for the buy planning and the like, mate. Is there anything else you want to say to finish up?
Um, yeah, don't lean too much into it because it can go wrong, but the easier teams will be easier than trying to play Melbourne, Penrith, and the Storms. Oh, Melbourne and the Storm. You know what I mean? Go for the teams that look a lot easier if there is a tiebreaker. This is sort of more tiebreakery than role and value. But if you're not so certain on a player compared to somebody else and they've got a good draw and the other ones are really tough, well, that's probably the decision maker for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and good to use it certain parts of the year, especially for Supercoach with it being more attacking. Less important in fantasy, more around where the buys are situated and how you have a good strong 17 each week rather than actual clear runs with attacking plays not being as important. So thanks so much for jumping into this one, guys. If you haven't checked out the private group information, that's in the description. Please hit subscribe and follow the podcast as well. You're all legends, and we'll catch you in the next video. We're getting close now.